Welcome to another episode of Assess That with Tom and Nat.
And happy Monday, everyone. We hope everyone had a great weekend.
Big welcome back to returning listeners and a big welcome to any new listeners joining us for the first time. We appreciate all of you.
In this holiday episode, we're going to explore grading through the timeless lens of A Christmas Carol. Now, Natalie, I have to give you full credit. This was your idea from a few years ago.
It was.
And I thought it would be fun to bring it back and kind of reignite that idea, freshen it up a little bit. Using the ghosts of grading past, present, and yet to come, we're going to unpack why grading is so hard to change, what we're getting wrong right now, and what future awaits if we don't evolve.
So along the way, we connect Dickens' classic story to the emotional, cultural, and structural forces that shape grading today. If you're looking to open meaningful conversations about grading in your school or district, this episode will definitely offer a powerful way in.
So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. Okay, this is our last episode before the holidays, so we wanted to do something a little bit different, something that blends story, reflection, and some pretty honest truth-telling about the way we grade.
So consider this your winter's tale about grading reform told through the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol. We're going to let three ghosts lead the way: the ghost of grading past, the ghost of grading present, and the ghost of a future yet to come.
Through each ghost, we'll look at why it's so hard to change grading, what we're getting wrong in the present, and what future awaits if we don't rethink the system, starting with assessment, not with the grade book.
So if you're someone who's trying to transform grading in your school or district, you can use this episode as a conversation starter with your team, your leadership, heck, even your parent community. You can borrow this past, present, future framework and run your own version of this conversation.
So grab your metaphorical top hat and scarf, my friends.
Because here come the ghosts of grading past, present, and yet to come. So in A Christmas Carol, Scrooge goes to bed on Christmas Eve already rattled by the visit from Marley's ghost. Marley has warned him 3 spirits are coming, past, present, and future, and they're not here to play.
Right. Scrooge, not here to play for sure. Scrooge lies awake waiting, and right on time at 1 o'clock, a childlike figure appears, simultaneously young and ancient, glowing with this strange, soft light. This is the ghost of grading past.
The ghost takes Scrooge's hand, and suddenly they're flying through the window back into Scrooge's childhood. They land in his old school on Christmas. But young Scrooge is alone in an empty classroom. His classmates have gone home and he's been left behind.
It's the first crack in Scrooge's armor. We see that early rejection from his father, that loneliness, that pain. That's where the seed of his bah humbug, that whole attitude is planted.
Now, Brené Brown once wrote, when we deny our stories, they define us. But when we own them, we can write a brave new ending. We can translate this straight into grading. What happened to us in the past does impact how we show up in the present. And if we don't understand our grading story, it quietly drives our decisions today.
And we all have a grading story. Try this for a second if you're listening. Think back to your own schooling. When you hear the word grades, what do you feel first? Before you think, what do you feel?
Exactly. And we will wager a guess it's probably not neutral. You're probably feeling something. And for most of us, grades were loaded with fear, anxiety, shame, or maybe just this intense feeling of pressure to perform.
Right. And if we never interrogate that, we carry forward this unspoken assumption that grades are a weapon we use to control behavior rather than a tool we use to communicate learning.
Now, that's the ghost of grading past. It shows up every time a teacher says, if you don't do this, you'll get a 0. It's that instinct to use grades as punishment because that's what's been done to us.
And here's the kicker. When teachers or parents defend punitive grading, they'll often admit, yeah, it was harsh, and maybe not ideal, but hey, I turned out okay.
Let me just say right here that if you're wishing the same harm on your children that was done to you, did you really turn out okay? Or is it maybe a sign that there's still some healing to do?
That's
Just saying.
a fair question. There's also this very human tendency to reframe our own painful experiences as virtuous, like those tough marks built my work ethic, or that strict grading prepared me for the real world.
Yeah, we see this a lot with anxious perfectionism, right? Someone who chased top grades for years may now preach grades teach responsibility and work habits. But if we really peel back the layers and look closely, sometimes they're just still stuck in that same obsessive perfectionism. In fact, I like to call this a mental purgatory. I borrowed that from you. I think you actually. But my mental purgatory was if you stay in that mindset and go, it's good, it made me the person I am today, that person has an obsessive quest for perfection, which will never end. And they also have a crippling fear of failure.
Yeah.
And if you're living in between those two polarities, no learning is actually happening.
No.
You're just running.
Right.
You're constantly on, like you're a hamster wheel because you're never going to meet perfection. You're never going to totally avoid failure. And it's actually a pretty awful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So you spend hours on things that feel safe. You go to Canva. You know who you are. Yeah. And we tweak aesthetics. We pick the perfect color palette. We spend 45 minutes picking out the perfect font, safe.
Mm-hmm.
While actually struggling to iterate, to take any real risks, to take feedback, or to grow.
Right. Now, to be fair, there are some people who did have a relatively neutral experience with grading, and they have a more neutral stance now, possibly, right? Mm-hmm. But that's usually the minority.
Totally. For most people, the emotions attached to being evaluated and ranked are intense. You're not going to find many folks who is like, oh, grading? I'm easy. Whatever the district thinks is best. Like, no,
right.
The opinions are strong.
Right. I could go either way.
Yeah.
Which is why the first step in any grading conversation is not like, here's our new policy. Like that never lands.
No.
It's, what was your relationship with grades like when you were a student? Like, that's where it begins. It begins with letting people tell their story before you try to rewrite the policy manual.
So if you're listening, here are a few reflection questions. You might even pause and journal about yourself later. First, what was my relationship with grades as a student? Second, did that relationship change from elementary through to high school or from high school to college? As a teacher, am I recreating that same emotional experience for my students? And finally, or have I intentionally tried to design something different?
Right. And we aren't just talking about the dark side of our grading past. There's also a bright side that's worth naming as well.
Oh, yeah. Back to Dickens. The Ghost of Christmas Past didn't only show Scrooge abandonment and rejection in his classroom. He also took him to Fezziwig's Christmas party. Oh, I actually we got to watch A Christmas Carol. Yeah. We see teenage Scrooge as an apprentice, dancing, laughing, deeply happy in a room full of warmth and generosity.
Right. Fezziwig represents this joyful, human-centered use of power, right? He uses his position not to control people, but to create community.
Now, for a lot of teachers, grading does have a Fezziwig side. Yeah. It's genuinely satisfying to recognize growth, affirm students, and see their pride when they've worked hard and learned something meaningful. There is joy here.
And there's also a very real structural issue. Grading is often one of the last remaining islands of autonomy teachers feel they have.
Right. Teachers are told what curriculum to teach, how to document, how to prepare students for standardized tests, how to use this or that ed tech platform. They're expected to be teacher, therapist, entertainer, content creator, case manager, sometimes even social worker.
And layered on top of that are policies, paperwork, initiatives, all of which can make teachers feel completely overmanaged and undertrusted.
And in the midst of all of that, there is a beacon of hope because grades become this one protected territory. In some jurisdictions, it's even written into policy that administrators can't change a teacher's grade, which reinforces the message, this is yours. This is where your authority lives.
Yeah, and because most teachers weren't actually taught how to grade, because very few of us get any kind of grading training in our teacher preparation, we've built systems like on the job, on the fly. Teachers have made hundreds of decisions about late work, retakes, group work, extra credit, zeros. Those aren't random decisions. Yeah. They're expressions of values and often expressions of their own stories.
Yeah, exactly. They're not random. They're expressions of their own stories and their identities that have grown out of their own stories and K-12 experience.
Which means when we say to a teacher, we need to talk about your grading practices, it feels like we're saying we need to talk about your worth as a teacher. That feels for some like a psychological threat.
So here's the huge lesson from the ghost of grading past. Before we critique someone's grading, we need to honor their story. We have to create a culture where teachers are seen and heard for the care and thought they've already put into their systems before we start suggesting that those systems might be inequitable or harmful.
Because here's what we know from cognitive psychology. When you push directly against someone's belief, they often double down, right? The harder you push, the harder they cling.
If you've ever tried to convince a colleague that zeros don't motivate learning by just pushing harder and presenting more evidence, you know what this feels like.
So rather than you're wrong, here's the right way, it has to sound more like, I see what you're trying to protect. I see what you value. Can we look together at whether this approach is actually getting you what you most want for your students?
Yeah. So back at Fezziwig's party, Scrooge experiences one more heartbreak. His fiancée, Belle, breaks off their engagement. She's seen his growing obsession with money, and she knows that there's no room left for her.
Breaking from our habitual way of thinking is just like that, right? It feels like losing a relationship with a familiar self, a self we've invested in for years. It can feel shameful and a little bit destabilizing as well.
And that's why it's so important that grading reform doesn't start from any kind of blame or superiority. It has to start from empathy and shared purpose. It may feel slow to start here, to spend time on storytelling and reflection first, but that's how we plant the seeds of real transformation instead of forcing superficial compliance to a new mandate.
The ghost of Christmas past fades. Scrooge finds himself back in his bed, shaken by what he's seen, but the night isn't over.
Soon, Scrooge is awakened again, this time by a booming voice and the glow of torchlight. The ghost of Christmas present is waiting, robed in green, seated on a throne of food, abundance spilling over.
He represents generosity, goodwill, and the possibilities of the here and now. He takes Scrooge out into the bustling streets on Christmas morning, then into the humble home of Bob Cratchit.
Now, the Cratchits don't have much. Tiny house, meager food, but the room is full of joy, love, laughter, and, of course, Tiny Tim.
Scrooge, still very much capitalistic, quietly asks the spirit whether Tim will live. The spirit gives him a chilling answer. If nothing changes, that small chair by the fire will soon be empty.
Dickens was actually taking direct aim at the thinking of Thomas Malthus and others who argued that the poor were expendable, just an unfortunate outcome of populum equations.
So if we ask, who is our ghost of grading present, where is the prosperity, the abundance, the possibility that we're ignoring right now?
And the surprising answer is, we'll only find it when we stop obsessing about grading for a bit and start talking seriously about assessment.
Right. Now, that might sound odd for a grading episode, but stay with us.
Yes, because right now in the world of grading reform, we have different frameworks jostling for attention. We have standards-based grading, going gradeless, ungrading, labor-based grading, proficiency-based grading, specs grading, evidence-based grading, contract grading. Each has its strengths and each has its limitations.
And look, here's the problem. The problem is not that people are exploring different approaches. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. The problem is what you and I have seen over the years as these kind of turf wars that sometimes erupt around them and these territorial battles that occur.
Yep, the little pedagogical foxholes, if you will.
Yes.
You see it on social media. If you don't do it this way and not that way, you're not truly equitable, or you don't care about kids, or this is the only real alternative to traditional grading. Now, people start throwing these, to use your word, purity tests at each other instead of just saying, hey, this is really hard, and going side by side for kids.
Yeah. And I remember in a past podcast, I talked about idea cults where people get fixated and they get into these foxholes, as you say. The tone gets cynical in these spaces. It can get snarky, can even get cruel. It stops feeling like innovation and it starts looking like the same old competitive model, the same old industrial mindset we say that we're trying to dismantle.
Exactly. And here's what I want to say out loud, even if it's uncomfortable. Hopefully you don't get upset, but I think you would agree with me here. When I look at who is most aggressively defending their turf in these online battles, it's often men.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it. It's not always, not everyone, not all men, but it's often. And as a woman in this space, I can say I love men. I appreciate men. Like, I love some good, healthy masculinity. But there is also this shadow side, and one that operates from scarcity, aggression, and control. And if we say we want these innovative, equitable spaces, it starts with interrogating our own behavior.
Yeah. And as a man in this space, I got to sit with that. I can't pretend that that's not there. If our work is supposed to be, as you said, joyful, equity, empowerment for students, but the adults in these spaces are modeling competition and posturing and public shaming, something's off.
And I feel like it's important here to acknowledge, like, for Tom, that I've seen this happen with you so much. Literally just last week, we had someone say, a man in a space publicly said your name to be like, I hope you don't agree with Tom about X, something you don't believe, because I don't agree with that. And it was like, I wasn't
even there.
You weren't even there. It was a woman presenting, and she literally was like, she told us, and we're both like, what is this? Like, what is this, like, gross male posturing?
This guy felt the need to peacock in front of his colleagues and make sure that everybody knew that he disagreed with Tom Schimmer about something that I didn't even say.
He doesn't even
know my position on it. We're not going to get into it, listeners, but it was really interesting because I'm like, that person doesn't even know my stance on that, because what they're disagreeing with is not what I said.
Exactly.
And I wasn't even present in the room.
So just so we're clear, we're not going to get radically different outcomes for kids if we're too busy lobbing grenades at each other from our little grading foxholes.
Yeah. So if the answer isn't pick the perfect grading camp or pick your idea cult, then what is it, Natalie?
The answer is to move the spotlight to where the evidence of impact really is, which is assessment. Not what grading paradigm wins, but what assessment practices, according to the research, actually transform learning for kids. Stop fighting about what you're going to call your system.
Oh my gosh, we do too much of that little naming stuff and trying to have our own little uniqueness to that. When people say, show me the research that this grading system works, it's like asking, show me the research about how this bathroom scale will help you lose weight. Grading is not about raising achievement. So that's such an erroneous question that people try to back you into. Is like, show me the research. That research doesn't exist because grading is not about increasing achievement.
Totally. The scale does not cause the weight loss, just like it doesn't cause the learning. It's the practices, the decades of research into formative assessment, feedback, self-regulation, clarity of learning targets, co-constructed success criteria.
Yeah. And when Paul Black and Dylan Williams' article called Inside the Black Box came out in the fall, it was October of 1998, they really were disproportionately responsible for reigniting a global conversation around formative assessment. There, of course, was other research at the time, but that article in 2025 terms went viral and everyone was reading it back then. And I remember people just being like trying to make sense of it because this idea of formative assessment and descriptive feedback had come out. And since then, study after study after study has confirmed when we use assessment as a process to feed learning forward, student outcomes improve, especially for those marginalized learners. Often the idea is that it raises the bar of achievement and it levels it.
Totally. But here's the catch. If we implement a shiny new grading system without shifting assessment practices, all we've done is dump the same old points into new containers.
Right. We'll still end up with superficial tasks that don't match the cognitive complexity of the learning goals or the outcomes, point accumulation systems where it's all about gathering and harvesting, compliance and obedience over thinking, just with shiny different labels on a report card.
So let's reframe assessment. Instead of treating it as a noun, an assessment or my assessments, a quiz or a test, a packet for points, we need to start treating it as a verb, a continuous process.
Right. That process looks something like this. First, it's clarifying the vision. What is essential to know and be able to do? Then unpack success. What does quality look like? How will we know we're getting there? Third, elicit evidence. Design tasks and experiences that actually reveal thinking, not just recall, right? Number 4, respond with feedback. We've we've been talking about feedback on this podcast forever. Give information that helps the students take the next step, not just judge what they've done, and make sure your feedback causes thinking, not just a set of directions.
Yes.
And finally, fifth, support reflection, right? Give students chances to tell the story of their learning, not just receive judgment, but actually start to tell the story of what they're learning and even how they're learning.
Exactly. So please notice that this process is deeply human. It doesn't just happen in school spaces in the artificial ways that we've created. This is what it means to be alive and to be a human and to be growing. It's cyclical. It requires dialogue, flexibility, trust, relationship, and everyone is engaged in it, both the teachers and the students.
Yeah, and for years we've talked about assessment of learning, assessment for learning, assessment as learning. When I first heard those terms, it probably took me 6 months to a year to keep those straight in my head.
Fair.
And that language for many, many years has been super helpful.
Yeah, but even these prepositions can keep assessment stuck as events.
Right.
Now we're doing assessment of. Now we're doing assessment for.
Yeah.
It's not as helpful sometimes.
And I couldn't agree more. My thinking on this and your thinking on this has evolved to a point where we need to amalgamate all of that.
Yeah.
A more powerful move is to see that assessment is learning.
That part.
Yeah. To assess is to learn about where we are, where we're going, and how to make maneuvers in order to get there.
Exactly. And that's where equity comes back in. I'll admit, there was a time when my thinking about equity veered towards just let the kids do whatever they're passionate about and then we'll support them, right? It felt good.
Yeah, it felt good. It felt generous.
It did.
But it also risks ignoring the reality that not all students come into our classrooms with the same social capital or the same background knowledge or the same access.
Mm-hmm. A colleague of ours, a friend, Ken Williams, he actually helped me reframe some of my thinking here. He said, equity means using our adult professional judgment to name what is essential for all students and then organize like crazy to get all kids there. All truly means all, not, we're going to give them some opportunities. These kids can do the extending stuff, but those kids aren't ready for it, so they get something else.
Right. Yeah. And Ken's other famous expression, if you call them low,
you'll
teach them low.
Mm-hmm.
So in the present, if we want more equitable grading, we have to start with more equitable assessment. That is about clarity. That is about access. That is about multiple ways to show learning and consistent opportunities to actually act upon the feedback they've received.
So grading will eventually enter the conversation. Yes, we can't just pretend it doesn't exist. We're not pretending K-12 schools can just ignore marks, transcripts, GPA. But if grading is the starting point of the conversation, we're just going to stay in this battleground.
Right. If we let assessment lead, grading can become a relatively small, late-stage summary, one piece of a much richer story that students are sharing.
Before we move to the final ghost, here's a present-day reflection question for you and or your team. So if we banned grades for 6 months and we're only allowed to use assessment, feedback, and evidence of learning, what would need to change about our day-to-day practice?
That's a great question.
It's a good question.
That's a great question.
Kind of experienced it during COVID too, might I remind you?
Don't worry about whether you could actually ban grades.
Yeah.
Just use that as a thought experiment to surface what you're really relying on and where grades are positioned in your day-to-day assessment work.
And now the final spirit appears.
In Dickens' story, Scrooge, shaken from his visits from past and present, suddenly sees a dark hooded figure, the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
This spirit doesn't speak. He just points. First to a stock exchange where men casually discuss the death of a rich man with indifference, then to a pawn shop where people haggle over items stolen from a dead body, then to a family who actually feels relief at the news of the man's death because he held their debt.
Finally, they arrive at a neglected gravestone. The spirit points, and Scrooge sees his own name. He is the man whose death did not matter.
So what is the ghost of grading yet to come showing us? What future are we hurtling towards if we don't rethink this system?
First, let's be clear. We're not just being dramatic. When you listen to students talk about grades, they aren't describing a small inconvenience.
No, I remember speaking at a district event where they brought 2 high school students up to open the day. And the question was very simple. Tell us about grading from your perspective. And they didn't hold back.
They did not hold back.
They did not. They talked about how grades felt like the point of school, how every decision, sleep, activities, friendships, breathing was filtered through how will this affect my average. They said they felt like they were being constantly monitored. They constantly felt behind. And sadly, they talked about how it made them feel deeply alone.
And here's the most haunting part of this story. That story could have been told by students in 1990, 1975, or 2003. Versions of that same story have been echoing through schools and school districts for generations.
If nothing changes, we shouldn't expect the mental health picture to magically improve. Data from before the pandemic already painted a pretty worrying picture. More than 1 in 3 high school students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And about 1 in 6 reported making a suicide plan in the past year. And what's worse, those numbers were even higher for LGBTQ plus youth and for girls.
Those are not abstract statistics. No. Those are kids sitting in our classrooms. Those kids' worth is often tied by us, by families, by the system, to those symbols in the gradebook.
So if we stay on this path, the ghost of grading yet to come shows us a future where not much has changed. Where we're still telling the same story about stress and anxiety and about breaking kids in for the real world 2 or 3 decades from now.
Yeah, some folks respond to this by saying, well, that's what we need, or that's why we need to ungrade. We need to raise an eyebrow at the whole grading apparatus.
And totally. And, we get the impulse. We get it. Jesse Stommel, I believe, talks about ungrading as a refusal to accept the premise of grading as we know it. There is some power in that critique.
Yeah, that's fair. But here's where I personally feel a bit stuck, right? Raising an eyebrow is not enough. Ranting about grading on social media, yeah, cool, but that's not enough. We actually have to build something better, not just point out what's broken.
Ugh, preach. And to build something better, we have to understand the role of extrinsic motivators more broadly. Grades are one expression of actually a much bigger pattern that's at work in our society.
Right. Dr. Laurie Santos on her podcast, The Happiness Lab, that's a great podcast, by the way, Happiness
so
Lab, yeah, does a fascinating episode called Making the Grade. And she connects the grading culture we grew up in to things like fitness trackers, like likes on social media, or the 5-star rating system on a Google review or something like that,
and
right?
just so we're clear, so Dr. Laurie Santos is a psychology professor at Yale University.
Yale, right.
So this is not someone that's just like a hack making it from her basement. She's pulling from a huge body of research here to raise an alarm bell, not even from an education perspective. She's like, this is the root of our discontent, people. Like, you rage at social media while hammering kids with a 0 to get them to do the work. Think about that. Think about that. Like, it's the same system. So her point is that external rewards, grades, likes, retweets, buzzes, badges, like whatever, all the little apps on her phone constantly trying to get our attention. Yeah, they do change behavior quickly. But what we're not asking is it changing behavior in the ways that we want? Well, take social media for a second. Any teacher could point at social media and cell phones and go, that is horrible. It is ruining kids' mental health. It is horrible for them. And they turn around and create an extrinsic reward system very similar to that. High pressure, ranking, comparison in their classrooms to motivate kids to do the things they want them to do.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy is stunning. So we can become addicted to the signal itself rather than the deeper purpose.
Right. And at the extreme, she notes that external rewards can turn love into hate and virtue into a vice. The thing we started doing for joy becomes something we resent. But we can't stop chasing it.
And honestly, some of the online battles about grading are starting to feel like that. The incentives of the platform, so online, so likes, retweets, attention, all of that, are actually driving the tone of the conversation more than students. It's actually very ironic.
Yeah.
Very ironic.
It is ironic. And the fact that at some point, if we could just take a half step back and just see it for what it is and do a little awareness and observation, it becomes a lot clearer. So the ghost of grading yet to come is asking us, do you really want to keep building your system around extrinsic carrots and sticks? Or is there another way to tell the story of learning?
So, Tom, what might that other way look like?
Well, okay, in Grading from the Inside Out, the book I wrote about, I talk about a grading true north that lives between the technical and the emotional. It's the idea of accurate grades, confident learners.
And here's the thing, we can't choose. There's no binary here. We need both. Right. If the grade is accurate, but students are crushed, it doesn't matter. And if students feel great, but the grade doesn't really represent anything meaningful, what they know and can do, we've also missed the point.
But what if we zoomed out a little bit further? And what if we imagined a system where grades weren't at the center at all? And instead, the central aim was accurate story, confident learners.
Love that. A world where our goal is to help each learner tell a true, nuanced story of their growth and feel confident in that story. Grades, if they exist, are just like a brief footnote, a chapter summary, if you will, at the end, but they're not the title of the book.
Yeah, it's kind of this middle ground of like there's the get rid of grades altogether, and then the grades are the center of the universe, and maybe there's just a balance in all of that, right?
Maybe.
And thinking about the fact that grades don't have to be centered in all that way. One way to get there is to think about voice. If we want students to graduate with a powerful sense of voice as learners, and more importantly, even as human beings, what kind of assessment ecosystem would they need in order to develop that?
All right, you might want to pause here, get a pencil, get a pen, get ready to write this down because this one's sticky. We're pretty proud of it. But here's a framework you can try. We're actually going to take the word voice and turn it into an acronym, okay? So the V is going to stand for vision. The O is going to stand for optimize. I is invite. C is cultivate. And E is expand.
Okay, so let's walk through each of those letters.
Let's do it. Okay, first, vision. This is where we get clear. This is where we have to ask ourselves and our teams, what is essential for students to know and be able to do? Like essential, keyword here, all means all, we're committing to this as the goal. And no, this is not every tiny frickin' detail and page in the textbook, people. This is like the deep, transferable skills, competencies, the things that students will need across the entire course and whatever their future might bring.
Right. This is where standards, competencies, and big ideas live, right? That's what's essential. Yeah. It's where we name the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions every student deserves to have access to.
So if you're a teacher, this could look like narrowing your unit to 3 to 5 clear learning goals instead of 20 little isolated outcomes that could be collapsed below them. This means writing student-friendly versions of those goals. This means saying them out loud often, using them as a teaching tool and not just listing them on your whiteboard or on a slide.
Right. And if you're a leader, it might mean organizing teams around essential outcomes and making time for them to define what does every student need by the end of this course.
Okay, next is optimize.
All right, so optimize. Once we know what's essential, we then design with intention. We ask, how can we organize learning so students have the best chance to succeed?
Now, this is where we unpack success. We co-create criteria. We build rubrics that describe quality, not just percentage bands. We design tasks that allow multiple ways to demonstrate that criteria.
Right. So practically speaking, this is what this might look like. Sharing exemplars and co-constructing success criteria with students. It also might look like designing tasks that allow choice of either product, right? So students can choose to video, podcast, essay, presentation, while actually still assessing the underlying learning. And it's also talking about using UDL principles to vary representation and vary expression.
Yeah. Just so we're clear, when we optimize, we're not lowering expectations. We're removing barriers that don't actually measure the learning we care about.
Right. All right.
Okay, so now the invite stage. This is where we invite both students and our colleagues to rethink their limiting beliefs.
Now, for students, their limiting beliefs might sound like, you know, I'm just bad at math. I can't do math. Or I'll never be good at writing. Or I'm not a school person. School's not for me.
Totally. And for adults, it could sound like, well, if I don't give zeros, they'll never learn responsibility. Or letting kids retake assessments isn't fair to the one who studied. Or if I change now, won't I be admitting I've been wrong my whole career?
In this phase, our job is to surface those beliefs, those limiting beliefs, and gently challenge them with evidence, with examples, and also experiences.
Yeah, so it might look like having students look at early and later work side by side to see their growth. It could look like sharing research about motivation and feedback with colleagues. It could involve just telling your own story. Like, here's something I used to do. I'm not proud of it, but here's how and why I changed.
Right. No one is shamed. No one is forced. It's an invitation, not an indictment.
All right, then comes cultivate.
All right, cultivate. This is the messy middle, right? Where learning actually happens. We take action, we try things, we use feedback to grow.
Yeah, assessment is everywhere in this phase. Quick check-ins, conferences, peer feedback, self-assessments, drafts and revisions.
Right. And our question here is, how can feedback help students take the next step? Not, how do I justify this grade or defend this grade, or what information will move learning forward? That's what we want.
Yeah.
What information is going to move the students forward?
And this is where we treat errors as information, not evidence of failure, where retakes and revisions are part of the design, not a favor students have to beg for.
Right. And again, leaders, you can cultivate by protecting time for collaboration, protecting time for providing tools. You can model a feedback culture yourself in how you interact with the teachers.
Yeah. And finally, expand.
Right.
There is a temptation here to make this final E evaluate, but we got to stick with this story.
Right.
This is what it's all about. This is where we help students tell the story of their learning and widen the audience.
Here's where we summarize learning. Yes, a grade might even appear here, but it's not the only thing, or even the main thing.
No. Instead, we might ask students to write a reflection explaining what they've learned and where they're still growing. We might use portfolios that collect evidence over time for them to analyze themes. And we might have student-led conferences where they present their learning to their families or even to their broader community.
Right. And we also expand horizontally, right? Mm-hmm. Inviting colleagues, families, and even universities into a different way of seeing student achievement.
And notice here, once voice is in place, vision, optimize, invite, cultivate, and expand, grading shifts to the very end. It becomes a brief summary statement of an already rich story.
And maybe, as universities shift towards portfolios or narratives or who knows, pass-fail systems, as some universities are already doing, it will become even less central.
In the meantime, we don't have to wait for the system to change to start building voice in our classrooms and schools.
All right. Okay. Back in Dickens' story, so back to, to the story, when Scrooge sees his own name on the tombstone, he's broken. He clings to the ghost's robe and pleads for a different ending. He promises, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year.
And that's really the invitation for us too. Can we honor the spirit of learning in our hearts and keep it all year, not just in the moments where we talk about grades?
Now, that means looking honestly at the past, our own stories, our own hurts, and our own identity as graders.
It means being courageous in the present, stepping out of grading foxholes, refusing to join the turf wars, and choosing collaboration over competition.
And it means shaping a different future. One where the story of learning is richer than a symbol, and where students' mental health and sense of agency are just as important as their transcript.
So here's our dare for you as we close. First, name your ghost of grading past. Tell your story to a colleague or even to your team and invite them to tell theirs. Then spot your ghost of grading present. Where are you feeling tempted to defend a paradigm instead of centering students and assessment? And 3, imagine your ghost of grading yet to come. If nothing changed from this point forward in your context, what would grading look and feel like in 10 years? And is that acceptable to you?
Then try one step of voice. Don't try to overhaul the whole system. Start with vision in one unit, or cultivate in one feedback cycle, or expand with a simple portfolio.
And share your story, post about it, talk about it at staff meetings. Let your learning call others into the journey. not to your grading camp, but into deeper assessment literacy.
Because that's what this podcast is about. Not quick fixes or perfect systems, but the ongoing work of building assessment and grading practices that actually serve our students.
So as we wrap up this holiday episode, may the ghost of grading past help you honor your story. May the ghost of grading present help you step out of the turf wars and into the work that matters. And may the ghost of grading yet to come remind you that another future is still possible.
And may you and your students find your voice in this process.
If this episode sparks something for you, share it with a colleague or use it as a starting point for a conversation at your next team meeting.
Okay, that is it for this week. We'll be back in the new year with more episodes of Assess That.
And don't forget to follow Assess That on Twitter or Instagram. We've got links in the show notes for both of those.
If you have any specific topics you'd like us to talk about, you can DM us on either of those platforms or send us an email.
And a reminder to check the show notes for links for all of those upcoming professional learning events.
Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. That helps grow the podcast reach.
And finally, if you like what you're hearing, please keep spreading the word about the podcast to your friends, your colleagues on social media. We would really appreciate that.
And remember, assessment isn't just a tool, it's a conversation.
And together, we're here to make it a better one.